Welcome to the Sage Solutions podcast, where we talk about all things personal growth, personal development, and becoming your best self. My name is David Sage, and I am a self-worth and confidence coach with Sage Coaching Solutions.
This week's episode is part 2 of our topic on curiosity and critical thinking. If you haven't already listened to last week's episode, maybe go back and do that. Because last week we talked about cultivating curiosity, and this week we're going to be focusing more on critical thinking and how critical thinking is essential to curiosity.
Curiosity and critical thinking is one of my 5 core fundamentals, and the 4th that we're covering on this podcast.
Before we get into it, our goal with this podcast is to share free, helpful tools with you and anyone you know who is looking to improve their life. So take action, subscribe, and share this podcast with them.
Last week, we talked about the power of curiosity and how asking the right questions opens doors to a deeper understanding. Today, we're building on that foundation with a discussion about critical thinking. But instead of hopping directly into critical thinking, I think we should retouch base on curiosity. We talked about why curiosity is so essential for learning and growing and becoming your best self. Curiosity is a strong desire to know or learn something and goes hand in hand with traits like inquisitiveness. We talked about how curiosity is fueled by things like being a lifelong learner, by staying open, by having a growth mindset, having intellectual humility, listening actively, and rethinking things when you get new information. We also started to talk about how curiosity is essential in your interactions with other people. Listening, asking questions, and wanting to genuinely find out about other people will make you learn so much more in those interactions. But this isn't just coming from me. This has been talked about for thousands of years by different people throughout history, by different authors, by different philosophers. Several seminal books that talk about this concept include The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, Think Again by Adam Grant, 12 Rules for Life by Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, and How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. To paraphrase some of the core concepts addressed in these books and how they relate to curiosity in your interactions with others, you should increase your question to statement ratio and listen more than you talk. Become genuinely interested in other people and seek first to understand, then to be understood. Become a good listener and encourage other people to talk about themselves and their interests. Don't make assumptions. Assume positive intent, and try not to take things personally. Be honest and precise in your speech, and be impeccable to your word and your promises. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. And lastly, you don't know what you don't know. Assume that the person you are listening to knows something that you don't, because everyone knows more than you about something.
That is a powerful list of wisdom if I've ever heard any. If you're like me and you need extra time to just sit with things and reflect on them and think about them more deeply, if I was listening to this episode, I would pause and go back and just take each of those in or even take notes on each of those, because every single one of those points are so powerful and so impactful. Now, you may remember that we ended last week's episode with the age-old adage, curiosity killed the cat. I had shared that I believe people often misinterpret the meaning of this by thinking it means too much curiosity can be a bad thing. But truly, curiosity in and of itself is not bad. It's only when we don't apply critical thinking to our open-minded intake of information that we can run into problems or consequences or unhelpful ways of thinking.
Exactly. The true meaning of the saying is what this core fundamental is. That you have to have critical thinking with your curiosity. Otherwise, you could put yourself in a dangerous situation. But I'm sure many people listening to this are wondering, what is critical thinking? Like, I've heard the term before, but it seems like kind of this vague, ethereal topic that most people cite all of the time, but few of us have actually heard a definition. Now, you deal with critical thinking in teaching, just like you deal with curiosity in teaching. And I know you did some preparation for this episode. So how would you define critical thinking?
As you can imagine, there are several different variations depending on the source in which you go to for the definition of critical thinking. The most comprehensive definition that I found was a combination of the Oxford Dictionary and a definition from the University of Louisville. So this definition defines critical thinking as the analysis, evaluation, and generation of rational conclusions based on information gathered through and generated by observation, experience, reflection, logic, reasoning, or communication that guides belief or action. Whew.
That is a solid definition, but also a hell of a mouthful.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and we'll definitely have to break it down. But that's what this is all about, right?
Oh, yeah.
He's really good at goofy impersonations, too.
Okay, so critical thinking is the skill that allows us to analyze, evaluate, and make better decisions in every area of our lives. In this episode, we plan on breaking down what critical thinking is, beyond just that definition, why it matters, and how we can start developing it today. So let's get into it. This is important because having zero critical thinking, I could walk up to you and tell you that you can fly and gravity isn't real, and you would just take me verbatim and jump off a cliff. You have to critically think about things. Otherwise, every single bit of information that you get, you will take as the absolute truth. Because not everyone has your best interests in mind when they're sharing information with you. And some people don't know that something is inaccurate. You also have to work through problems using critical thinking. The curiosity is how you get all of the information to then critical think your way through a problem. At its core, critical thinking is the ability to think clearly and rationally about information, ideas, and problems. It's not just about taking things at face value. It's about analyzing and questioning what you encounter. Critical thinking involves analysis, evaluation, inference, reasoning, and self-reflection. To break these down, analysis is breaking down complex information into understandable parts. Evaluation is judging the credibility of the information. Inference is drawing conclusions based on logic and evidence. Reasoning is structuring your thoughts and arguments logically. And self-reflection is questioning your own assumptions and beliefs and thinking about the way that you're thinking or using metacognition. Essentially, critical thinking helps you make sense of the world in a clear, reasoned, and open-minded way. It's about engaging with the world actively, not passively.
Whenever I'm taking in new information, I find it most helpful to stop and think about how it can be applied directly into a context within my life. With my current role as a reading interventionist, my brain naturally went immediately to reading a book. Whether you're reading fiction or nonfiction, you have to have critical thinking in order to be able to truly enjoy the story or learn and evaluate the information that you're taking in from an informational text. And of course, you have to be approaching the book with curiosity in the first place to even have that desire to want to read, enjoy the story, and take in that information.
I would like to point out both stopping to evaluate and think about the information and figuring out how it's applicable in that situation are critical thinking. This is so ingrained in how we take in information that in my eyes, these two topics should and have to be linked in almost every situation. So when we're thinking critically, we should be using reflective thinking, meaning we reflect on what is going on in the situation, what is going on in our own heads, how we feel about it, if emotions are playing a large part in the decision we're about to make. It's almost sort of a state of awareness, social awareness, situational awareness, and self-awareness, and the ability to reflect on those things. Math, science, logic, and rationality are all linked to critical thinking. Complex math problems require people to think critically to solve the problem. Science is possibly the purest form of critical thinking. Thinking like a scientist is critically thinking. The whole scientific method is based on using logic and rationality to study the structure and behavior of the physical, natural, and social world through experimentation and testing these theories with the evidence that you obtain through the scientific method.
I'm sure we all remember the scientific method from school. You might have learned it back in the day, or rather recently, with the acronym FIAC, standing for Problem, Hypothesis, Experimentation, Observation, and Conclusion. To start the scientific method, you have to start from a place of curiosity, observing some sort of problem or wondering something about the world, and then developing a hypothesis that you want to test out. From there, you develop an experiment that has controlled variables and evaluate the evidence that you observed in the experiment to draw a conclusion. All of that is critical thinking that started with curiosity.
The application side of critical thinking is actually doing it. You have to take action and use that thought process, which is why pragmatism and practicality, in addition to being realistic, are all important when you're thinking critically. Some other incredibly helpful mindsets that factor in to critical thinking are understanding the difference between infinite and finite thinking. Finite thinking is what you use when you are trying to solve a problem or win a game or competition or handle a preset event that has a clear end and a way to actually resolve it or win, accomplish the goal. You are moving towards that clear, set end. Infinite thinking is what is used when working with things that have no clear set end, that are unending, with problems or events that don't have a clear winner and a clear loser. They require that long-term infinite thinking. Some examples of finite games would be football, basketball. You are trying to win the game. But most things in life are not finite games. They are infinite. They keep going. Your life keeps going. Your job keeps going. You are not trying to win. You are trying to have long-term infinite thinking. And taking that mindset as a part of understanding whether what you're doing is a finite game or an infinite one helps you make better critical decisions.
Wait. Let me just do some reflective listening here and make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. So, finite thinking is anytime you're in a situation where you have one set goal and you just have to do the thinking required to achieve that one goal, like winning a game. Whereas infinite thinking is any context where you have multiple different goals and different interrelated contexts happening all at once. So you have to do more deeper, layered, complex thinking. Am I getting that right?
You're close. It's more about where the end lies, right? In a finite situation, you could still have multiple goals. Your goal is to catch that pass as a wide receiver in that moment, but your bigger goal is to win the game. But the game ends. There is a finite, determined way of winning. You cannot win an infinite game. You cannot win life.
Okay. Got it.
So you are playing for the long term. You are making decisions that are good for the life now and going forward, not just everything I can do to win right now.
Okay, neat. I learned something new.
Another incredibly helpful mindset, debatably one of the most helpful mindsets, and another one of the core fundamentals, is thinking in shades of gray. Having shades of gray thinking is so linked and entwined with critical thinking that having that mindset makes it so much easier to determine and evaluate things in the moment, because you already have that tool in your tool set to not just immediately jump to the black and white. If we color something totally black or totally white just because it's easier, we're already likely starting with a misconception that's going to make it hard to critically think. Understanding that things are more complex than that, finding the accuracy, the balance, the flexibility that that mindset gives you will make it that much easier to critical think. As I've said before, you shouldn't believe everything that you hear, read, see on TV, see on the internet, or even think in your own head right when it's thought. We have to critically think about all of these things. It's important to remember that language and the words that we use, both internally and externally, shape our thoughts. One of the most helpful things to remember when it comes to how language shapes our thoughts is the difference between reports, inferences, and judgments. I learned about this concept from the book Language in Thought and Action by S.I. Hayakawa and Alan R. Hayakawa. A report is very similar to a fact. It's a part of language when we are telling somebody something that is immediately verifiable and provably true. If somebody fell, and I say, "Oh my gosh, she fell," I am giving a report that somebody just did something and it is clear, definable, and verifiable. An inference is an assumption that is made based on observations and reports that we have received. Inferences aren't always based on logic, but when we're critically thinking, we're making inferences based on logic. The last one is judgments. Judgments are either a report or something we observe, or an inference that we hear, and judging it to be true, false, good, bad. It's giving meaning, it's adding value to it. Understanding the difference between these three things helps us understand that sometimes we are taking inferences as reports. We are treating assumptions that people make as if they were facts.
I have an example of an inference and a judgment I made just this past weekend that I think is really applicable here. I'm honestly a little nervous to share it just because it could make me sound bad, but I really think it's helpful for people to hear real examples of why stopping to think critically after making a judgment or inference is so important. So here we go. It's important to know that the scenario I'm about to explain happened within a matter of seconds, but it just seems longer because I'm breaking it down for the sake of this podcast. This past weekend, I was a little bit in my head telling myself unhelpful stories that I haven't been doing enough. I haven't been spending enough quality time. I haven't been helping out enough. And ultimately, I just wasn't feeling like I was enough. Now, it's important to know that your wife, Hannah, is hands down one of the most thoughtful, caring people I know. And while I was already going through this mental turmoil in my head, She stopped by and dropped off some things for Mom and John just out of the blue, which is totally within her character. And she wrote a note that she signed, "Your favorite daughter-in-law, Hannah." Now, she had no idea I was feeling this way, and I know she would never ever do anything with the intention to hurt me. But for whatever reason, when I read her note on the counter, I completely misread it as saying, "Your favorite daughter, Hannah," when it really said, "Your favorite daughter-in-law, Hannah." And immediately, I made a judgment of myself to say, "See, you aren't enough. Hannah's showing up in ways that are way better than you." Now, if I would have just stopped right there and not thought critically about what information I was taking in, that could have created huge problems. That would have just reinforced negative things happening in my head. That could have made me upset with her for absolutely no fault of her own, because she had no idea that I was feeling that way, and she didn't do anything wrong. So good thing that in that same moment I stopped and evaluated my thinking to realize I'm taking something personally that has nothing to do with me. And this is coming from my own big feelings and insecurity and has nothing to do with her. Hannah's amazing. But if I wouldn't have taken that moment to stop and think and reevaluate what I was seeing and thinking and feeling, my insecurities could have created some serious damage to our relationship or to my own self-esteem.
That story is a great example of how you can use critical thinking to determine the difference between a report or making your own inference and then a follow-up judgment, and how damaging those can be if you don't think critically. In any endeavor that you are critically thinking, reading, listening, or problem solving, it's about analysis, evaluation, and logical reasoning. This is where we use things like either deductive or inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is a logical process that involves drawing specific conclusions from general ideas and processes by deducing things or eliminating options until you only have one left or there's only one that makes the most sense. It is a way of figuring things out through exclusion. It was very, very prominent as the way that Sherlock Holmes would deduce the truth. Deductive reasoning is technically the most precise of the two reasonings, but there are many situations where it is just not feasible. If you have to deduce from every possibility, there are situations that it just is not going to work. You are going to spend your entire life deducing every possibility. That's why science generally doesn't use deductive reasoning. It uses inductive reasoning.
Right. And inductive reasoning is all about accumulating data to make decisions, or making decisions based on conclusions of your observations. So that could be even as simple as looking outside to observe what the weather's like before you decide what to wear for the day.
And frankly, you can often use a combination of both, excluding things that don't make any sense in that situation to narrow down your pool, and including more data so that you have better options to pick from. And lastly, to use a critical thinking example from history, Aristotle had what he called syllogisms. They're now called Aristotle's syllogisms. Let me give you a quick example. It's a way of logical reasoning to figure things out, and if you can use this syllogism and make sure that it makes sense by combining this three-part statement, it can help you prove or disprove things. All dogs are animals. All pit bulls are dogs. If you accept that both of those first statements are true, then you have to accept this third statement. Therefore, all pit bulls are animals.
Yeah, I can accept that.
I mean, I would hope so. Okay, so we've done a lot of talking about what critical thinking is. But why does critical thinking matter? Here's a few key reasons. First, It helps you make better decisions. Every day we make decisions, big and small. Critical thinking helps you weigh options, understand the consequences, and make informed choices, whether it's in your career, finances, or your personal life. Second, it protects you from manipulation. We live in a world full of information, misinformation, and bias. Critical thinking equips you to evaluate the validity of what you hear, see, and read. Whether it's from the media, social networks, or even well-meaning friends, it protects you from being misled. Third, it's incredibly helpful for problem solving. When you're faced with a challenge, critical thinking allows you to break down problems, to consider different solutions, and to identify the most effective course of action. Fourth, it's really helpful for personal growth. Critical thinking encourages intellectual humility, like we talked about last episode. By questioning our assumptions and considering different perspectives, we grow, learn, and rethink as we go. It helps us adapt and refine our beliefs. And finally, possibly the most important one for my coaching, critical thinking helps us with confidence and independence. As we sharpen our critical thinking, we find that we can make decisions more confidently. We rely less on others to tell us what's wrong and what's right, and more on our own ability to think things through independently.
Yep, that last part is the part that I need to work on. It is easy for me to just rely on the comfort of asking somebody else or getting help and not having to make a decision.
Yep.
So I often am a great critical thinker, but that is the area that I'm going to work on critical thinking more.
Anna is the most decisive person I have ever met.
I will be someday. Growth mindset.
If you were just curious, you would accept that without thinking critically about it after having met her.
Ha ha ha.
Hey, crazier things have happened. Speaking of crazy, a popular definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. If you continue to do something and you are getting a bad result, you might want to try critically thinking about what you can do different so that you can get a different result. Ignorance is rarely bliss. Being more informed is almost always better. We favor the comfort of conviction over the discomfort of doubt. But one of the best ways to become smarter and to be a better critical thinker is to become more comfortable with ambiguity, to get comfortable getting uncomfortable.
All right, so we've talked about what critical thinking is. We've talked about why it's important. Now, how do you become someone who more effectively and frequently thinks critically?
Like many other things in life, critical thinking is something that you have to practice and build over time.
You mean like a muscle?
Yes, like a muscle. It's something that's taught in schools, it's taught in college, it's something that employers want desperately in their employees. Critical thinking is something that we have to build and hone over time by using a whole slew of different skills and logical, rational reasoning, shades of gray thinking, many other things in combination with the curiosity that we talked about in last episode. Now, this one is not quite as cut and dry. It's not one of the topics that I can just say, do this, and then you've got it. It's something that's going to be a lifelong building process. But we are all doing it constantly, at least somewhat, whether we're aware or not. So by bringing your awareness to it and actively trying to critical think more often, you are building that muscle. So now that we know why critical thinking is so crucial, let's talk about what ways we can use to develop it. Ironically, start with curiosity. Curiosity is the foundation. We started with curiosity in part 1 for a reason. Ask questions, not just what, but why, how, what if. Dig deeper into topics that interest you and be willing to challenge the status quo. And if you want to think creatively, you actually have to use what's called counterfactual thinking, which is where you assume if things were different, then how would things go? This helps you breed creativity in your thought processes with questions like, what if? Second, expose yourself to a diverse array of perspectives. Critical thinking thrives on diversity. Read books, listen to podcasts, or engage in discussions that expose you to new ideas, especially ideas that are different from your own. Avoid the my side bias and beware of the confirmation bias, where you take in more of the information that confirms what you already believe and ignore the information that doesn't. One of the best ways to do this is to build a challenge network in addition to your support network. And to ask yourself, how did I originally form this opinion? What evidence would change my mind? Evaluate these new ideas, these new perspectives, with curiosity and an open mind. Then, critically think about them. And shades of gray thinking can help quite a bit here. They might be 20% right. They might have made one really good point. You can figure out the nuance. Try to genuinely see things from the other person's perspective when you're talking to them. The more you see the world through other people's eyes, the sharper your thinking becomes. Practice articulating other people's points of view clearly enough that they approve. It's a fantastic way to mitigate your confirmation bias. Which brings us to the third point: challenge your own beliefs. One of the most powerful things you can do is regularly question your own assumptions. Rethinking or thinking again. Ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? And what other perspectives should I consider? This keeps your thinking flexible and open to growth. Contrary to popular belief, children who rethink their test answers instead of just going with their gut score higher on multiple choice test assessments. Just because you rethink something doesn't mean you have to change your mind. You might have been right the whole time. But the simple act of rethinking does give you a bit more of that certainty. In fact, curiosity is like embracing both uncertainty and certainty at the same time. And so is critical thinking in a way. It's all about being open to the discomfort of not knowing things and the variety of the world, while trying to gain some more certainty or clarity about how it works. So remember, let confusion create curiosity, and if you find out you were wrong after rethinking, that's great. You just learned something.
Okay, so my big takeaways here are expose myself to diverse perspectives, or just perspectives that are different than my own, challenge my own beliefs, and be willing to rethink if, after I think critically about new information, it calls for me to think differently than I did before. I have a great example of when I recently did this. Mom told me that she watched a documentary, and I made a quick judgment about the subject of the documentary based on my own feelings about it previously. Mom then came to me and said, I'm kind of disappointed with the opinion you had of that. And we had a really good conversation where she told me a lot of the facts and information she learned in the documentary. And although initially I felt myself kind of pull back and want to fall into that belief of stick to your guns, this is what you said. If you go back on it now, I'm going to seem like
you're flip-flopping, like you're changing your view, or that you're not holding to your convictions.
Right.
You're talking about the my side bias.
Right. I almost fell into the my side bias because that was my first initial gut reaction of, ooh, don't go back on what you said. But then I thought, you know what? The information she provided me with is valid and it's factual and it does change the way that I'm thinking. So I was put in a position where I was forced to rethink and challenge my own beliefs and think about, why did I hold that opinion in the first place?
It sounds like you took a step back and had some intellectual humility. Instead of assuming that you have to be right, because if you're not right, that means you're the type of person who's wrong, you actually were open to hearing new information and changing your mind. It sounds like you understood that changing your mind or being wrong is not a reflection of who you are.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, the hardest part of this, without really getting into the minutia of what the conversation was about, was that admitting I was rethinking and changing my perspective also meant that I had to admit my initial judgment was pretty harsh and wrong.
That made a lot of sense to me. The fourth way that we can implement critical thinking is by practicing reflective thinking. After making decisions or forming opinions, reflect on them. Ask yourself, why did I think that way? What evidence did I use? Could there be another interpretation? This self-awareness helps you refine your thought process. Use the 5 whys also happens to be our 5th way. This technique involves asking why 5 times to drill down to the root cause of an issue. It's a great way to dig deeper into your problems and uncover hidden assumptions that could be shaping your thinking. And 6, which in my opinion is the most optional of these, is to engage in thoughtful debate when the situation is right. Debating isn't about winning. If you're going to have a debate with somebody, you need to set some boundaries about having that debate without it getting heated and having it really be about both of you trying to learn the truth. Engage with people who have different opinions and test your thinking. You can sharpen your reasoning and help you see blind spots in your own logic by having a thoughtful debate.
A key distinction here is that a debate is not the same thing as an argument. A debate becomes an argument when one or both of the parties in the debate stop thinking critically and stop approaching the other person's point of views or perspectives from a place of curiosity.
And I actually want to double down here and say that I don't even know if argument is the right word. While it is technically, the word argument has 2 meanings, which is why I'm becoming more and more inclined to start calling that a fight. Because when things get that heated, it's basically a verbal fight. An argument has a second meaning, which just means to structure an argument, or basically to make your case. Lawyers make arguments without getting heated. There is a way to use that word in a helpful, productive way by formulating an argument to help convince somebody of something. But that other use, that fight-like use, is generally very destructive to both relationships and to people actually learning the truth.
Whew, there is so much information here. In fact, this may be the most information-dense episode we've had thus far. So before I could share my biggest takeaways from this episode, I actually had to go back, re-listen to it, stop and take notes here and there, and really reflect on what are the biggest takeaways out of all of this information. Here's what I came up with. Although openness and curiosity are a good thing, openly accepting all new information you take in is not. Before you take action or develop a belief that's based on new information, stop and think like a scientist. By that I mean question it, test it out, do some more research on it, and otherwise analyze and evaluate the new information you're taking in before you develop a conclusion. And that includes the stories we tell ourselves in our own minds. Evaluate your own thoughts. Think to yourself, is this a report, an inference, or a judgment? If it's an inference or a judgment, is it coming from a strong emotion like fear? Am I taking offense or taking this personally when it's not really about me? Or is there really validity and evidence here? How could I test out the story I'm telling myself to see if my interpretation is really valid? And if it's not valid or true, how can I rethink about it? When you take this approach and think critically about all new information that you take in, you're more likely to have perspectives and take actions that are helpful.
I've got to say, that was a wonderful summary. So the last couple things to remember. A great way to think critically is to think like a scientist. Don't shy away from caveats, contingencies, and exceptions when figuring things out. Confidence is not competence. As a confidence coach, I am telling you, just because somebody is confident does not mean that they are competent. Often, being competent makes people more confident, but being confident does not necessarily make you any more competent. When you are screening information, don't give more weight to things just because somebody is confident. Confidence is great, but it is not competence. And lastly, the field of critical thinking, and all of the experts in it, generally agree that critical thinking is about your accumulation of knowledge. How you use the skills of critical thinking to use that knowledge, and your dispositions about critical thinking, meaning whether you actually use it. And that's it for today's episode, which is part 2 on curiosity and critical thinking. Remember that critical thinking isn't something you either have or don't. It's a skill you can develop with practice, and everyone does it, at least to some degree. Start by questioning your assumptions, considering different viewpoints, and engaging in reflective thinking. As you do, you'll find yourself making more informed decisions, solving problems more effectively, and growing more as an individual. We appreciate you listening. I understand that this has been one of the most dense episodes we've ever had, but there is tons of great information here. So until next time, stay curious and keep critically thinking. Thank you for listening to the Sage Solutions podcast. Your time is valuable, and I'm so glad you choose to learn and grow here with me. We'd love to hear your feedback, so click the link in the description and let us know what you think. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss out on more sage advice. One last thing, the legal language. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. No coaching-client relationship is formed. It is not intended as a substitute for the personalized advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional.